WIMG 1300 and WPHY Channel 25 are proud to present In the Public Interest. Each week, we explore a new topic of interest for you, the public. We now join our host live from the WIMG studios.
Good evening and welcome to In the Public Interest on Trenton Talks. I'm your host, Jean Shippos, and you're listening to us live on WIMG AM 1300. If you're watching us on TV, we're on WPHY Mercer Channel 25, and if you're on the World Wide Web, we're at WIMG1300.com. So welcome to In the Public Interest. I have a very interesting guest tonight, and we're going to talk about something that you probably only remember from your history books. And there's probably a whole generation of children out there who have never even heard of this period in history. And that's why I called this show tonight, Poland's Heartbreak. I have with me tonight Agnieszka Gerwel. And I just had to say that because I thought it was so beautiful. Agnieszka Gerwel, who we will call Anna. Thank you, Anna, for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Anna is an undergraduate administrator at the Department of Comparative Literature at Princeton University. So thank you so much. And Anna has a special interest, of course, in all things Polish because she is from Poland, but also in the history that I referred to a little bit earlier, and that's what happened to Poland during World War II. So Anna, tell us a little bit about your history with Poland, how you grew up there and your family and your memories.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I came from Poland in 1984. My family and I come from Poznań, which is one of the largest cities in Poland. And I left my country when I was 12 years old, and that was during communism. So I had just a regular childhood there, and I never expected to land here in America.
And you came via Libya, Africa,
yes.
Right? We were talking a little bit earlier, and you said when you left Poland, you thought you were just going on vacation because your dad had gotten a job.
That's right. My parents both received jobs in Libya as medical doctors, and I thought that actually we were going to be there for a couple of years and then go back to Poland, which turned out to be not true because they planned to escape from Poland actually at that time. My father was involved in Solidarity movement led by Lech Wałęsa, and Solidarity was crushed in 1981 in December. And at that time, both of my parents, due to the hardships under communism and my father's hiding, decided that we will leave Poland forever.
And that's probably something else that many children today don't know about or maybe haven't learned in school. There was time in 1981, now that's not really ancient history, that's not that long ago, in 1981, where Poland was fighting against communism and trying to be free under Lech Wałęsa.
Yes.
And to hear you say that your father was part of that movement, that's absolutely incredible. So you were refugees. You actually were political refugees when you had to leave.
Yes, that's correct. At first, when my parents worked in Libya, I went to school there. And after we defected from Libya, my father became a political refugee since he organized healthcare workers in Poland against communist government and worked with Solidarity at that time.
So from Libya you went to Italy?
Actually, from Libya we went to Tunisia, where my mother's sister lived, and from there we went to Italy. And in Italy we spent several months. We were waiting for our visas to come to the United States.
And then you ended up in the United States?
Yes.
And was it what you expected? You were a young girl. That had to be so... You were 14 by that time.
Yes, and it was very different. It was nothing like what I expected. The culture was different. I went to several different schools, so I experienced Catholic schools for girls and a public high school, so there are different systems of education. Then in Poland, of course, there are a lot of things here to purchase, as opposing to back then in Poland, we couldn't really get many things. So plus number of TV channels, like a lot of different things that were not available at that time in Poland. Plus, for me, the most exciting was the number of different people and nationalities in America.
Oh, because in Poland it was all
Polish.
Basically all one race, one culture.
So this was very different, like an eye-opening experience for me to come here. Yeah.
To come here and see color,
absolutely,
and see culture.
Yeah, different languages. Different ethnic restaurants. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
And then you had to learn how to speak English, right?
Yes.
You came here just speaking Polish.
I came here speaking Polish. I did learn a little bit of English since I knew we were escaping, but that was in Libya and in Tunisia. I was learning a little bit of English, but certainly I learned British English, so American accent was very different. So I could speak, but I couldn't understand the American accent.
Oh my gosh.
It was funny.
And so when your parents came here, did they know anybody?
Yes, my aunt sponsored us in New Jersey. That's why we ended up in New Jersey. She was a physician, and we needed a sponsor, and so she did that for us with her husband.
So you have a very, very interesting history, and my mouth dropped when we were talking about it, about your grandparents and your parents being born in a concentration camp. Is that correct?
Actually, my parents were born in my father was born in Stralsund in Germany, and his family was taken there as forced laborers, and along with 1.5 million of Polish people. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland, they asked some people whether they agree with the occupation of Germany. And if they didn't sign a special Volksdeutsch list, they were moved to Germany as forced laborers. And that's where my father was born, and that's where my grandmother, grandfather, and great-grandfathers worked for a period of 2 years.
So the Germans came in, they literally forced out a whole generation of people from Poland to Germany.
Correct.
Where they made them live and work.
Yes.
And then you said eventually your parents found their way back to Poland.
Yes.
Tell us that story.
After the family was resettled, they stayed there for a period of 2 years, and then they were freed, and so they walked for 6 weeks back to Warsaw, to Poland.
Walked?
They walked, yes.
Walked.
And I just want to reiterate that my story is by no means exceptional for a Polish person. There are many, many Polish people with similar stories to mine. I decided to vocalize the story of the Second World War, where in our culture a lot of people keep their family stories to themselves, and they're very private about it. So if you ask any Polish person, if you know them a little bit better, they can tell you about their atrocities as well.
I know we were talking about a whole population of people in Poland who were persecuted in World War II. Yes. In our history books in America, for the most part, what we read is the persecution against the Jewish population. That was, 10% of the Polish people at the time. But there was another huge population, which were the Polish Catholics, of which you are one.
Yes.
Who were also persecuted, and we knew nothing about. I didn't know it personally, and I'm Catholic, until I met you and I read your article. Let's talk about your article, too. It's a beautiful article, by the way.
Thank you.
And you were published where?
This was a Midway Review. That's the University of Chicago Journal. It was published last May.
And what prompted you to write this?
I received a very special letter via email from an existing relative, Jędrzej Garwel from Poznań, and it was a yellowed copy of a letter written by a Dachau survivor, by a priest, telling the story of my great-uncle who was a priest and who was murdered in Dachau.
And tell us about Dachau, because I'm sure many people listening don't know what that is today.
Dachau was a first concentration camp built in Germany. It was built in 1933, and it was a prototype for the future concentration camps built in occupied Poland and Germany. And at the beginning it was a camp for German political prisoners, and afterwards it became a camp, of course, for the Jewish population and for Catholics and for clergy.
See, and this is something I knew nothing about, that the Germans literally came in and rounded up all the Catholic priests and clergy and moved them to concentration camps. For what purpose? For what reason?
So when Nazi Germans invaded Poland in 1939, they wanted to do two things in Poland. One thing is to eliminate Polish Jewish population, and this was a genocide and a genocidal policy. Another policy was against the Polish Catholics. They wanted to make them into slaves for the German Reich. Therefore, the most effective way of doing it is at the beginning to round up and kill Polish intelligentsia so that they couldn't organize sort of like Polish nation or couldn't continue Polish culture. Clergy was part of the Polish intelligentsia, and what I mean by intelligentsia, I mean teachers, professors, lawyers, anybody who would pursue continuation of Polish culture. So they closed churches, they burned libraries, they closed universities, arrested en masse professors and teachers, as I mentioned previously. They arrested them and at first placed them in prisons, and afterwards a lot of them were placed in concentration camps. For example, I believe that the first prisoners in Auschwitz were Polish Catholics, members of intelligentsia, or people who were trying to fight against Germans, and they were the first ones who died there. By any means, the largest population of Auschwitz who was perished were Jews, but at the beginning, like I said, they tried to immobilize Polish nation, so Polish Catholic nation.
And you said something really beautiful and quite painful, I thought, that the Nazis, when they invaded Germany, they took the heart and soul out of the Polish people.
Yeah, when the invasion took place, yes, I believe that by murdering the Polish Jews, and I just want to tell you some numbers, 3 million Polish Jews perished as a result of the German occupation, and about 1.9 Polish Catholics, plus about 1 million of Polish Protestants, and in addition Ukrainians and Belarusians were murdered during Second World War. And I believe by murdering the Polish Jews and a lot of Polish Catholics, the heart of the flower of Poland was taken and killed.
You said it was constant brainwashing, so even if you weren't Jewish or Catholic, there were posters on trees and on buildings.
There was a propaganda in occupied Poland, in cities and in villages. There were posters in Polish, in German, I believe maybe even in Yiddish, talking about the Jews as being subhumans, as people who are having diseases. They were portrayed as enemy of the nation. The Polish people were encouraged to denounce them, and they were discouraged from helping them. Poland was the only country in which the death penalty for helping a Jewish person existed out of all the European countries. So certainly that created a deep divide between the Jewish and the Catholic population in Poland. A lot of the Polish Jews, unfortunately, did not speak Polish prior to the war. They were Hasidic, or they were Orthodox Jews, and they didn't. They weren't involved. They weren't integrated as much as they were in Germany in Polish population. Therefore, it made it a little bit
more difficult
to hide them and for them. Yes.
Yes, because they looked different. Yes. I mean, they were very specifically Jewish. You could tell the Hasidic Jews, because of the long hair and the culture and what they wear, and not having spoken the Polish language. Yes. Poland's heartbreak. We'll be back in a few minutes. We're going to take a break. I'm talking to Anna Gerwell, and we're talking about Poland's heartbreak, the activities of World War II, and what specifically happened to the Catholic people in World War II.
Don't miss the 12th year celebration of Peter Nero and the Philly Pops on Saturday, October 5th at 7:30 at the Trenton War Memorial, featuring Grammy Award winner Peter Nero with special guests Christiane Knoll, Gary Maurer, and Debbie Gravitt. Peter Nero and the Philly Pops will feature the best of Broadway with songs from your favorite Broadway shows. Since its inception, Broadway has contributed to more American pop classics than any other entity. Join us as the Pops celebrate some of the best music from the best Broadway shows by the best writers whose work has dominated the pop song market worldwide. Tony Award nominee Christiane Knoll, Tony Award winner Debbie Gravitt, and Gary Maurer, who play the lead in the Broadway production of The Phantom of the Opera, join Maestro Peter Nero and the Philly Pops for an evening of spectacular music and entertainment. Tickets are on sale now at slrc.org or by calling 877-987-6487. Be there for Peter Nero and the Philly Pops, Saturday, October 5th, 7:30 p.m. at the Trenton War Memorial.
Welcome back to In the Public Interest on Trenton Talks. You're listening live to WIMG AM 1300, and I'm Jean Shippos. If you're listening to us on the World Wide Web, we're at WIMG1300.com, and if you're watching us on TV, we're at WPHY Mercer Channel 25. I'm speaking with Agnieszka Gerwell. We call her Anna for short. And we're talking about Poland's heartbreak because Anna has a unique perspective. She was born in Poland. She actually escaped with her family from Poland during what is it called specifically at the time? Reformation?
It was during communism and after Solidarity was crushed down. Yes.
After Solidarity, during Solidarity is
when it was crushed by the martial law.
Okay. But and how did they ever get back in power then? And you saw Lech Walesa, which is absolutely amazing. Yeah. He signed something for you.
Yes, I saw him. He was giving a talk at a large stadium, and at that time actually we couldn't hear him very well because at that time communist government decided to fly helicopters over the stadium in order to silence him. But I still stood in the front row and I got an autograph from him.
Wow.
So that was very special.
Yes, I imagine.
It was very special.
So if you don't know who Lech Walesa is, look into Poland's history and Solidarity. It's a very important history. Let's go back to World War II. We're talking about the Catholics in World War II and your special interest in what happened to the Catholic priests specifically. So why don't you tell us why you have that interest?
Well, I was always interested in the history of Poland and during World War II, but specifically because I received a letter regarding my great uncle who perished in Dachau. I began doing some research, and first of all, the letter gave me a lot of information, but also there are a lot of archives in Germany which are open to the public at this point, and you can receive very detailed information. I received letters detailing his death certificate and even detailing what he bought in a concentration in a camp canteen, which was very touching for me, very moving. So I started researching what they did during the day. They got very little food as in all the camps, and they worked very hard. For example, he worked at the construction of garages and quarries, and he also built crematoria. So about 500 priests built crematoria in Dachau, and they were the first ones to walk through the crematoria and being gassed. And by no means is it typical. This is typical in other camps as well for
the prisoners to build their own gas chambers.
Yeah. So it was horrifying. So I basically learned about his daily routine. They were woken up very early in the morning, sometimes 4 o'clock, gotten one piece of bread and a little bit of coffee for breakfast. Then they had roll call, during which they had to line up, and unfortunately during one of those roll calls in another camp in Mauthausen, one of my uncles was killed. He was apparently sticking out. He was too tall compared to other prisoners. So he was asked to march in the middle, and he was killed with backs of guns in front of his family at a roll call. He was a young lawyer in Poland who was taken prisoner at the beginning of the war when the Nazi Germans wanted to liquidate Polish intelligentsia. The conditions were awful. They slept in barracks on a little bit of straw. They slept on bunk beds. They, like I said, they had very little to eat, and they were very often ill. And the healthier prisoners were taken by the Nazi Germans for medical experiments. which I'm still trying to find out whether my great uncle has undergone such experiments. I don't know that, and I can maybe read a quote.
Yes, do.
It's a very short quote describing the life in Dachau by William W. Quinn, a colonel in the 7th U.S. Army. That's how he described the camp. Dachau, 1933 to 1945, will stand for all time as one of the history's most gruesome symbols of inhumanity. There our troops found sights, sounds, and stenches horrible beyond belief, cruelty so enormous as to be incomprehensible to the normal mind. Dachau and death were synonymous. So after Americans liberated Dachau, actually without any trials, they killed many guards just upon seeing what they saw, seeing the bodies of the prisoners.
And your uncle was not fortunate enough. He died in Dachau.
He died in Dachau. Okay. Yes. Yeah, he died. He died supposedly of stomach ailment. But the Nazi Germans were very precise in documenting the deaths of the prisoners. But we're not sure whether, in fact, he died this way or
starvation.
Yeah, who knows?
Yes. You know what I found totally intriguing was that the Nazi Germans opened these records.
Sure.
Or not Nazi Germans anymore, that the
Right.
Germans, first of all, that they kept records at all is amazing to me. But that they opened these records, and you said they're quite open and honest, and
Yes.
and you can get them through the email. You can get whatever
Yes.
records you want.
Yes, that's true. That you can send a request asking about a given person, and they will send you letters or emails detailing information as to what happened to them in a camp. There are a couple of explanations. One explanation for the reason why they were closed for so long is to protect the victims. Some of the people didn't want the world to know what happened to their family members. Another fact, which is very heartwarming, is that the young German population, they have undergone a denazification. They believe that what happened was a crime of humanity, and they themselves are willing to just let the world know what happened. So I think this is a very positive change in German society.
I know we talked about this before, but you hold no grudge against the German people.
Not the young Germans, and obviously if I would have found out who was the commander of the camp when my uncle was there, I think he should be, or she tried as a criminal, but by no means I don't judge the German nation or anything like that.
This was the leadership that came in. This was under Hitler.
Under Hitler, under Nazis, certainly.
You said your parents still talk about that period, and your grandparents were they were alive, they were young people at the time and involved in it. What do you remember from the things your parents or grandparents said? Well,
they always talked about different incidents, what happened, how, for example, they received more bread during the war, or how they were not caught in a roundup. There were various random roundups of Polish Catholics, even people who were not confined to the ghetto. So they told me a lot of stories like that. Also, it was a surprise. My grandfather was active in the Polish underground during the war, and I didn't know anything about it because during communism he didn't want to talk about it. However, a film was discovered in an attic, and suddenly we had hundreds of pictures from his fight in Warsaw Uprising and then his imprisonment. He was a prisoner of war following the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, and that was also published in a newspaper. So I found out about my immediate family from a newspaper article in Poland. But as I said, in my immediate family, my father, even though he's a physician, I think he should be a historian because he knows history of World War II very well, and we have a library at his home, which purely talks about the World War II, what happened when the Soviet Union and Germany invaded Poland. So
I wanted to talk about you used the word ghetto, and I think that I'm almost positive that word did originate from the German people during the war. And can you explain what a ghetto was then? Yes.
Sure.
But with your accent.
Ghetto.
Ghetto.
Well, ghettos during the war were places where the Jewish population was rounded up and forced into. In Poland, the Jews were asked to wear a Star of David, and they were forced into very small parts of town or city, and they lived in the ghettos until they were transported to concentration camps. And for example, in Warsaw, I believe that was one of the largest ghettos in occupied Poland, and the Jews staged an uprising there, a Warsaw Ghetto uprising, because they knew what was awaiting them. They knew they would be all transported out. So despite the fact that the German forces were definitely stronger and more overwhelming, and they had little arms, some of which was provided by the Polish Home Army to them, they did revolt, and they managed to kill some Germans. I think there was about maybe 80, but I could be wrong about that fact. Conditions in the ghettos were horrifying. There were a lot of illnesses. The food rations were much smaller than for example, the Polish population, even though for Polish population, Catholic was also small. And they could not leave the ghetto. Sometimes they did illegally through the sewers in Warsaw, for example, and they were smuggled out sometimes if they were lucky. Also, my grandfather during the war worked for the Institute of Hygiene as a biologist, and he worked on typhus vaccines, which were then smuggled into the ghetto, and for that there was a death penalty as well. But it was a really horrifying reality for everybody.
You've been back to Poland now. You said this summer you went back to Poland. Tell us about what it's like going back now. Have you been back many times since you were 12?
I've been back several times. One time I lived in Poland for 4 years after
did?
college. Yes.
Wow.
But when the freedom took place in Poland and democracy became a reality. But specifically this summer I went to Poland where I had a chance to meet the grandniece of the last surviving Dachau priest, Anna Jagodzińska, and unfortunately I didn't meet her great uncle because he passed away in April. He was just shy of his 100th birthday. But I also, when I was in Poland, I visited the Museum of the Warsaw Uprising, which is a fantastic educational institution. And then I visited the Museum of the History of the Polish Jews, which is, I think, an incredible undertaking. It was funded mostly by the Polish government and by some Jewish organizations and individuals. It's going to describe the history of the Jewish nation in Poland for the past 1,000 years. But Poland changed a lot. This is what to say. There are lots of new buildings and restaurants, and it's a thriving country.
And you think the people have gotten their heart back?
I hope so.
I
hope slowly.
Recovered. Are there any memorials? Are there memorials about this time?
There are many memorials.
So that people won't forget. Let's get to that too, because we're almost out of time. But I wanted to get to the point of why you did all this work. Why you focused on this work?
So first of all, I did this work because, like you said, in the schools here, there's not enough information about the suffering of the Polish Catholics. I also did this work because I do not want people to forget about these atrocities based on religion or ethnicity, like in the case of Poland, in case of Holocaust and the Catholic suffering. And another point is that I would like, I always thought of the dialogue between Polish Jews and Polish Catholics, and I would like to highlight the Catholic suffering so that the Jewish people feel that we also suffered and we could mourn our tragedy together. That's very important to me.
I think it's very important to everyone, and I know we talked briefly about today. If we look at what happened in Poland during World War II and we look at our world today, what is similar, what kind of genocides are similar that kids today can identify with so that they understand what happened in Poland, not only in Poland, but in all those countries in World War II. And we talked about genocide, and one was Rwanda.
Yes, that's right. One was Rwanda, one was maybe far away, but Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and I mean parts of what's happening with gassing people in Syria. It's
I was thinking that too.
Sure.
In Syria.
Yeah.
Well, Anushka, we are so glad you were here today to talk to us about Poland's heartbreak. It's a period of history where I think the people who lived it or who remembered it are dying off, and it's a history that we should never forget.
Never.
So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me, Gina. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to WIMG AM 1300, and this has been In the Public Interest.